we go. We're merging into traffic. I hope there's no cop gonna give me a ticket. Feel the power. That's it. 40. 0 to 60 in, I don't know, 30 seconds? Maybe 35 seconds. We're still not doing 60. I'll let you know when we're doing 60. You could read a book about now. Oh, we're doing 60. So that had to be 40 seconds. Had to be. You're looking at 25 years of work, but I never spend more than an hour and a half at a time restoring a car. I lose my patience, so I just walk away, and that's the key. Each night I'll have dinner, I'll go in the garage, I'll work for an hour and a half, and then I look at the clock. As soon as an hour and a half is done, it's like a bell goes off. Damn, I'm done. I don't care how into it I am, I'm done. I go upstairs and do something else. And after 3 years of doing that, the car magically is complete. It's amazing. You just got to stick with it. One interesting thing to note is when I do my restorations, it's not in this barn. This is just like a parking lot. I just park cars here. I do them in my garage in the house. It's a 2-car garage, no lift, no fancy schmancy tools. I just have hand tools and some electric tools, and that's it. So if anyone thinks they can't restore a car without all that equipment, well, you can. I do it. Why Saab? Well, good question. Basically, when I was a kid and I saw these Saabs on the road, especially the Sonnet, I just knew I had to have one. I thought it was cool. And I had a Matchbox car, the Sonnet. I had that little car. I said to my parents, I'm going to get one of those when I'm 16. So I saw the ad in the paper, took it for a road test with my father, and he was like, slow down, slow down. I'm like, oh, this car can handle it. And I ended up buying it, and just as luck would have it, it was in great shape. It didn't have a lot of rust on the floor pan, and the interior was in great shape, and it ran perfectly. After about 6 months, my parents started to get phone calls from friends in the neighborhood who said I was terrorizing their street, going too fast. So I was told that it had to go, and they purchased the Subaru Brat and told me I had to sell the Sonnet, give them the money for that, plus more money, and get the Brat. 10 years went by, I was engaged, and I was looking through the newspaper and I saw an advertisement for a 1974 Sonnet. I went and checked it out, and it was in great shape, but he wanted like $2,500 for it, and he couldn't pay his rent. So I said, let me think about it. So I had a plan. I figured I'd call back in a while, see if he still didn't pay his rent, offer him like 18. So that's exactly what I did. He was gonna get evicted. He was like, 18 cash? I said, 18 cash. He says, all right, come and get it. It was green when I bought it, and now it's Mitsubishi bright blue. It's the only Saab that I painted a non-Saab color. Then they started falling on my head. It was raining Saabs, you know. People would see the Sonnet, I'd be pumping gas in the car, some would pull in, my daughter's got one of those in the barn, you want it? You know, it's like, how much you want for it? Free, just take it. So next thing you know, I'm dragging another Sonnet home, and then another, and now I'm taking them apart, I'm keeping the pieces. You know, I'm mechanically inclined, so it's easy for me to pick things up, but I never had like a mentor who showed me how to work on cars. I mean, at that time, I'd get a book from the library about fiberglass work and teach myself how to do fiberglass work. I'd read a book about tuning up a car and try to tune up a car. It's all trial and error. And when it's not your principal form of transportation, if it takes a while to get it right, who cares? Well, right now we're driving a 1958 Saab 93B. Saab first came into the US in '56, so this is the second year that they were bringing them in. And it's powered by a 3-cylinder, 2-stroke engine. It has 750 cc's and produces around 36 to 38 horsepower. All you have to do is look at one of these silly things and you could see, you know, why it looks quirky. But obviously the 2-stroke motors were quirky. I mean, they smoked. You had to dump oil in the gas tank. You had to keep the RPMs way up. The 2-stroke engine isn't like a 4-stroke. A 4-stroke has valves that open and close. A 2-stroke has no valves at all, so the RPMs can go as high as you want. You can't float a valve. There are no valves to float. When the piston goes up, air blows out of an exhaust port. When it goes down, it's sucking fuel in on an intake port. It's very simple in construction. There's just 7 moving parts. You have 3 connecting rods, 3 pistons, and a crankshaft, and that's it. So there really isn't much to go wrong. But because it's an underpowered car working very hard, they don't go 100,000 miles. You're lucky if you get 60,000 out of a motor. So sometimes when I'm driving the car, I prefer to wear this hat. It kind of, I don't know, makes me feel a little better about driving such a slow car. You know, you have to have a sense of humor when you drive a car that can only go 65 miles per hour. I also have some goofy glasses that I don't have with me. But it's a lot of fun driving around in period clothing in a period car. Memorabilia. It's like a disease. This stuff grows on you. It multiplies like rabbits. I mean, one minute you have 1 sales brochure and you're telling people who have 5 of them that they don't need to have 5, and the next minute you have 500. I started to run an ad in Hemmings Motor News in the wanted section. I buy Saab memorabilia. People would call me out of the blue or send me a letter with a list of what they have. And at that time, you know, you'd hop in a car and go to their house and check it out, or you'd talk to them on the telephone and send them, you know, a few dollars. And it just kept growing and growing, and I ended up amassing a huge collection of memorabilia. Die-cast model cars in different scale. Pretty much every sales brochure ever printed by Saab from 1949 through 1974. Every road test from every magazine ever printed, I think, about Saab from 1949 to 1974. 74, incidentally, is like the cutoff for me. That's when the last Saab Sonnet was made, so I kind of lost interest after that. Interoffice memos and corporate documents from Saab from the late 50s and early 60s. I ended up with them. I mean, I don't know how I ended up with some of this stuff, but I've got a mountain of it. Corporate documents. All Saabs have always been front-wheel drive, so back in the day when everyone was going around in these big boat American cars and they were listing to one side like the Titanic, the little guy in the Saab is buzzing around the same corner 65 miles an hour, and the car's relatively level. This is a 30-mile-an-hour turn, and we just took it at 55. Some of the more interesting features are the overhead fan shaft. Sweden is so cold in the winter, they wanted to make sure the occupants were warm, so they kept the radiator behind the engine, away from the cold air coming in up front, and they kept the fan far away from the radiator so it didn't cool the radiator that much. And by doing that, the engine temperature stayed up high and the occupants stayed comfortable. Now, if it was really cold out, you would put plates in these openings here to seal them up, and you would pull from the passenger compartment, you would pull this chain, and it would lift this blind up. And the blind goes all the way up to the top, and that way the cold air doesn't come in. And if you look under the engine, you'll see that it's completely sealed up. One of the problems in the States was where it gets hot in the summertime, the thing would overheat. So that's why vents were put in the hoods. These are called tropic vents, and that allows some hot air to escape. I think anyone who drives this car would be pleasantly surprised at how well it handles even today, even compared to a modern car. The only thing it's lacking is power. You don't know what slow is until you drive one of these. This car has what's called a Monte Carlo engine in it. It's the 3-cylinder, but it has side draft carburetors. And the side draft carburetors give it a little extra power. It also has high compression pistons and a high compression crankshaft. So it gives it maybe 10 more horsepower than the sedan. So it actually screams right along. Keep the RPMs high. That's the key to any 2-stroke. Never let it bog down. You can go around 80 miles an hour in this car comfortably,
Top speed is about 100 miles an hour, but let me tell you, that's pushing it.
The Sonnets that I've had, I started out with the 74, which was the last year that they made them. Then after that, I purchased the 68, which has a V4 motor, and it's a little different body style. And then after that, I got this one, which is number 22 of 28, built in 1966.
Now, in 1966, Saab was first making Sonnets, so they needed to do a design study. So they made 28 cars. Approximately half of them went to the US and half of them stayed in Sweden. The purpose of the car was, number one, to learn how to put them together, and number two, so that the motoring press could take a look at them and hopefully not drive them. I say hopefully not drive them because they were thrown together so quickly with such a poor build quality that they barely ran.
The dealers were instructed to show them to people, but don't let anyone drive them because they might not drive well, and that was an understatement. The cars, you know, have the build quality that you'd expect from an 8th grade shop class. I mean, what could I say?
All 28 cars are now on a registry, and there were only 2 cars that were missing. Number 22 and one other, I don't remember the number. So a while back, my wife got a phone call from a gentleman who said that he had a 1966 Sonnet. So my wife immediately called me at work, and I said, well, it can't be a 66 because they only made 28 of them. So when I got home, I called the guy back, and I asked him what the vehicle identification number was. And he said, oh, that's easy to remember, it's 22. So I quickly looked at the registry, and sure enough, number 22 was missing, last known to exist in Ohio, and it was owned by Ed Rathburn. So I said to the guy who had the car, do you know Ed Rathburn? He says, oh yeah, I bought the car from him. So I had just found one of the 2 missing cars. Sure enough, the car was laying, you know, in the barn fresh, in horrible condition. But I had to have it.
I needed a rotisserie for this car because the floor was so rusted out, I knew I had to flip it over. So I went out and bought dolly wheels, the same inexpensive ball-bearing dolly wheel that you could find at Lowe's or Home Depot. And I welded the flat part to the front of the car onto the like the unibody. I welded another one on the back, and then I took the wheel out and put a 2x4 where the wheel goes and built a little square frame so that you could spin the car on these single dolly wheels. It's so light, you know, and it cost me, I don't know, $35 to make a rotisserie. You gotta just think cheap, you know, that's the key. You know, if you want a lot of cars, you gotta collect a car that's inexpensive, like Saab, and you gotta, you know, think outside of the box. You gotta do everything on the cheap.
Once all the rust work was done, I rebuilt the engine, rewired the entire car, and threw it back together again. And now it actually runs pretty well. It probably runs better now than it did when it was new. The guy I bought the car from said, forget about ever getting the wipers to work. They cob together the wiper linkage. It's all handmade, and it doesn't work. And he's right. It's all handmade, and I tried to make it work, and they don't work. When you turn on the wipers, they go back and forth about 4 times, and then the linkage flies apart. I would have to do a total redesign to get the windshield wipers to work. So I just use some Rain-X, and I don't worry about it. It drives surprisingly well right now, but I wouldn't take it cross-country, I could tell you that. Well, I always like driving fast, but there's a problem with that on public roads. It's a 1961 Saab 96. It started life as just a road car. It was owned by a woman, Gertrude Lockwood, who was a teacher at Marist College. She sold the car to Especially Swedish, which was a place that worked on Saabs in Saugerties, New York, where it sat on the side of the road for 10 years. I stopped in repeatedly to buy the car, but they didn't want to sell it. And finally, when they did sell it, it was pretty much a basket case.
So I brought it home, got it running, it ran really well, and I just, kept building on it. It took a few years to really get it back together. After I restored the car, I had this beautiful stock-looking vehicle. So I wanted to make it into a rally car, just for appearance sake and just to have some fun. So I did that, and it took a couple of years, and then when it was all done, it was just so pretty. It was like, all right, now what do you do with a pretty car? You enter it in a concours. So I sent photographs to the Greenwich concours, which is probably second only to Pebble Beach, and they accepted my application. I was totally shocked when I won an award for Best Special Interest Car. So on my way home, I'm looking at this car that's like so pretty and so ready to race. It's like, why do I have this car? Now I'm questioning, what else is there that I can do with it? I have my Lexan plaque from the Greenwich concours, and I have a car that's like screaming at me, run the crap out of me. So I decided that was the way to go. It was like, now we can just have fun. Let's kill this thing. So I've been killing it ever since. Started to break. The rear shocks blasted through the rear fender. The front shock mounts were snapping off. The front of the car was cracking off at the firewall. Just kept going and going and going. Basically, the weakest link breaks. You try to fix it. Hopefully you get it right the first time. If you don't, it breaks again and you try, something else. Corporate documents. If you're used to disc brakes, this is a real revelation right here, because you got 8-inch four-wheel drum brakes, and let me tell you, they're nothing like modern brakes. This car has one good panic stop in it. Panic stop number 2, you're the one who panics.